Welcome, everyone. This is the fifth of our NoFC Reflections from Retirees seminar event. And today I'm really happy to have Ken Mallett and Todd to give us, Todd Ramsfield, to give us the overview of force pathology over the past 50 years. To let you know, for those that are if you want copies of some of the presentations, we will be recording both the video and the presentations files are also coming through, and at some point we'll be making those available off on YouTube. Right now they're being stored on GC Docs. So I'd like to turn this over to both Todd and Ken, who could do the introductions to one another, and go ahead and take it away.
Great. Well, thank you, Ron. I am Todd Ramsfield, forest pathologist at the Northern Forestry Center. So before we start, I just want to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples have lived in our region for thousands of years. And as we come together today, I want to acknowledge this out of respect for the First Nations and Métis people that call this landscape home. It's certainly an important thing that we're doing now, is acknowledging Indigenous people, and yeah, with what's been going on in the media and the residential schools. Yeah, it's something. Anyways, as I said, I'm a forest pathologist. I've been here for about 10 years, and I certainly took over from Ken. So with that, maybe Ken, I'll hand it over to you. You can introduce yourself, and then after we've done the introductions, we can have a little bit of back and forth, and we'll finish that off with a PowerPoint presentation.
Well, thanks, Todd. I'm Ken Mallett. I first started at Northern as a graduate student. I was a graduate student at the Yasuda Ratska and started there in about 1981, and then graduated, and I went down to Southern Alberta for 2 years, and I was fortunate enough to get a job back at Northern Forestry Center as an operational forest pathologist starting about 1985. And then in 2001, I became the director of forest biology at Northern Forestry Center, and then that title changed several times, and I was the director of the fire science group, believe it or not, for a while. And they probably were happy they had a guy who didn't know very much about fire, because they could get me to do a lot of things for them. Anyhow, I retired in 2015, and I had a great career at Northern, and I'm most happy to be able to do this.
Great, awesome. So Ken, just tell us a bit about the origin of forest pathology at the Northern Forestry Center.
Well, sure. I'm not sure if, well, a lot of the retirees will know about it, but maybe the new people don't know very much about CFS and its history. I'm just going to go way back, and into the 19th century. A man by the name of Josiah Stewart was brought on to basically be the CFS, or the forestry department. And he basically rode across the country on a train and made observation on the forests he saw across Canada, and what was needed by a young country to do something about those forests, to manage them, protect them, and so on. And so with that beginning, he sort of started this whole enterprise we called CFS. And one of the things, of course, was forest protection. They recognized with the settlers coming in that forest fires were a problem. And so they had hired young people to come out and be rangers. But then also starting in the late 20s and early 30s, they recognized that there were insect and disease problems in the forests, but they really didn't know what they were or where they were. So they formed units of rangers, they called them Forest Insect and Disease Survey Rangers, to basically go out and just survey to see what was out there, what was causing the problems. And these rangers would come back and they would give their samples and that to specialists who would identify them. And so that went on for quite a period of time until right into the 80s, and Mike Ramaison and Colin and a wide variety of other, Roger and other people were FIDS rangers to begin with. And then that, as you know, we after 30 or 40 years, we had a pretty good idea of what was there. And through those efforts, we became aware what were the significant problems in terms of diseases and insects. So CFS hired specialists in those areas, entomologists, pathologists, to work on those specific problems to see what we could do. So at Northern, our lab really came to be as well. It was several labs really. There was a lab in Calgary, there was a lab in Winnipeg, and then many people don't realize this, but there was a lab in Saskatoon, which was a forest pathology lab. And so those labs operated independently until probably the mid 60s, late 60s, when they were all folded into one. Northern Forestry Center was built in Edmonton. So one of the first forest pathologists that is really of interest, and I actually had the same job title as operational forest pathologist, was a man by the name of Dr. Peter Norden. And Peter is a very impressive fellow. He was a great pathologist. He worked really well with industry, trying to educate industry what was going on, what they could do about the problems that they were having. And then later on, he left Northern and he went east and eventually became the Dean of Forestry at the University of Toronto, where he remained there for many years, and at least until the mid 80s. And then many of you might know that he was, I think, an editor of the Canadian Forestry Chronicle, I should say. And yeah, so he was one of the first that was at Northern. And then very rapidly, they hired a wide range of mycologists and pathologists. Now, mycologists are people who study fungi, and forest pathologists are people who study the tree diseases themselves, and as well some fungi. So we had a wide variety of pathologists at Northern. Just thinking of some of them, like Joe Baranier, Russ Bluell, John Hopkin, John Powell, Yasu Aratska. I'm just trying to think of Harry Zalaski, and I'm probably going to miss a couple. So, but anyhow, they were all there, and they were studying a variety of different things. Russ Bluell and Joe Baranier studied root diseases as well as that, and that's what I studied. Roy Whitney had started at the lab in Saskatoon, and he later moved on to Great Lakes. And I'm mentioning these names because these people really are, and I don't think many people realize in CFS, a lot are quite very well known throughout in the literature, and it contributed really greatly to our knowledge of what was going on in the forest and what to do about it. Most notably, Yasu Aratska, he was my mentor, and he was my PhD supervisor. He was a forest pathologist. Yasu was born in Japan, and then his grandfather and his father were both eminent rust researchers. And Yasu came to North America in the 50s, and he studied at Purdue and received his PhD, and then he got a job at Pacific Forestry, or as a postdoc at Pacific Forestry Center. And he told me one time, I think it was in the early 60s, and he was offered a job, and he could pick wherever he wanted to work. So it had to be in Western Canada. He could work at in Pacific, or he could work at Calgary. Well, he didn't know anything about Calgary, so he went to the map and he looked and he saw it was near the mountains. So he really liked the mountains, so he chose Calgary, and we're really fortunate he did, because he had a wonderful career. He is an eminent scientist. He is very, very, very well known in the rust fungi and his work on that, and made many important discoveries. So Yasu was there. John Powell was also an eminent rust researcher, and later went on. He studied microclimatology and was really at the forefront of how the climate change group was sort of initiated. And I'll get back to a little bit later on. Anyhow, there was all these forest pathologists, and then around the late 60s, early 70s, it was recognized that in Western Canada, at least in the prairie provinces, that air pollution could be a potential problem. That was because of the oil sands area, and also with the oil and gas industry in the eastern slopes. And in Manitoba, it would have been in around Thompson with the smelters there. So Northern made a decision that time that okay, we understood what the diseases and where they were, and we had done quite a bit of work on them, but this was a new area and we needed to really get a grasp on that. So a lot of the pathologists who I had mentioned were given a choice, we're going to be moving in this area. Do you want to move into that, or what do you want to do? And many of them chose to move to a different center, to Pacific or to Great Lakes. And so I essentially left Yasu and Russ Bluell at Northern, and then Russ later, well, Russ became a millionaire because he invested in gold in the 70s, and he decided to retire from CFS because of that. But anyhow, that's how we moved into the pollution research. So people like Serge Malhotra, Paul Addison, and
Doug
Gary
Maynard.
Hogan and Doug Maynard were brought into Northern, and they formed the core of the pollution group there. So that for many years was going on, and they were working on that and what damages it was doing to the forest, and reporting on that. And then later in the mid 80s, they decided that they needed go back into operational forest pathology because the provinces were looking for information on that area and how to help them. And so I was hired to do that type of work. So as I said, I was fortunate. I worked with Yasu, so we worked together as a team. But also at that time, there were Jan Volney had come on, and Jan was an entomologist, a terrific entomologist, and he'd started it at Jan was actually a professor at Berkeley, and taught forest entomology there. I decided to move back to Canada, and initially started in Winnipeg at the Winnipeg lab because we had started up a sub office at that time, and worked there. And then he moved to Edmonton later on. So when Jan and I were there, we recognized that, and I don't mean this to sound denigrating or anything, but many of the problems in entomology and forest pathology had the ones where you could easily figure out what it was and try to figure out what to do. They've been solved. But the more complicated problems there, and there were many of them, was these interactions between the environment, between different pests. And so Jan and Doug Maynard and I sort of joined forces to do a sort of an integrated approach towards studying these problems. So the one would have been the classic example would have been up a baseline mountain and in the Rocky Mountain House area, where we're looking at the effects of if there was any effect of the sulfur on insect and disease damage to forests and so on. And then Jan and I worked extensively in Saskatchewan and in Manitoba, because we thought it was important not only to do work in Alberta, but Saskatchewan and Manitoba, because they were part of our region. So we did projects in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, some in the Northwest Territories. Jan did some work up in there. So, and at that time, we were fortunate. There were the foresting FERDAs, we call them. I'm just trying to remember what the acronym stood for.
Forest Research Development Agreement.
Yeah, and when we were first asked to apply for that money, we didn't think we were going to get we didn't think there were a lot of people looking into it, looking and wanting money for that. So Serge, who was our director at the time, had encouraged us to put in several different projects, and maybe you'll get one. Well, we got lots, and it became a big deal. So anyhow, we'll show you some pictures of it later on. Sorry, Todd, I sort of rambled on. Anyhow, I became director. We brought Todd on, and I'm proud to say that I was one of the people that hired Todd to be the successor to me, and I'm really happy that he's there.
Oh, well, thanks, Ken. So really what I heard was, early days starting out, FIDS, understanding biodiversity, forest pathology, insects in the region, and then sort of a gradual transition to more integrated research to really understand how these organisms were interacting and the damage they were causing in the forests. One of the things that I do, and I think we still do, is actually, work with the provinces. When you were working in the past, how much linkage did you have with the province, providing any sort of extension or that sort of thing?
Well, exactly that, and that was one of the reasons was I was brought on. I had worked for the province of Alberta, and but I'd worked in the agricultural sector, and so I had experience working with farmers and that, but also could understand the needs of what the provinces were looking for. So together with Herb Suretsky, who was sort of a mentor of mine in terms of working with provinces and doing workshops with them. And what we were trying to do was develop their skills in identifying insects and diseases so that we could transfer that technology and that information to them so they could pick it up and look after their needs as they saw them. So Herb and I would go out and give these workshops all throughout all Alberta, and we were in, I think, Saskatchewan and Manitoba as well. And one of the stories I have about Herb is that, when I first started, I think I went out with Herb and we were up, well, we were scouting out some sites down and around, I think, Banff or even further south. And we had stopped the truck and we were walking into the woods, and I see this piece of liver hanging from a branch on the tree. And I go, that's kind of weird. And then I could smell some blood. And so I said, hey, Herb, there's a piece of liver here. And I smell blood. And Herb's eyebrows is raised. And he goes, we got to get out of here, Kent. And then, so I really, why? And he says, that's a grizzly bear kill. And they're warning us that they're there. So we better get out. So, Herb was a fantastic naturalist, and he taught me a lot about those types of things. And those things that's the only way you could have learned that stuff, was by going out with somebody who was experienced in that type of thing. And I really appreciated that. So anyhow, Herb and I did that. And then Jan and I would do these projects in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And I did one project where we were trying to show the effect of what happens. Armillaria root disease is a fungus that attacks trees, and you can see it when their trees are really young because it kills them. But when they get older, you don't really see them dying, but they do get into the roots, and they can cause substantial growth loss. So we decided to do a project over in the Sandylands in Manitoba, where it was a freshly we got them to harvest a site. We knew that there was root disease. And then what we did was we stumped the areas. That is, we pulled the stumps, and it was a replicated experiment. So some areas were stumped and some areas were not stumped. And then we went back and we planted with red pine and jack pine. And then we let them grow, and we just measured their tree measurements, their height and their diameter, and then how many what the losses were to the disease. And Todd's continuing on with that study. So that's 35 years now, I think, afterwards. So I think Todd has a picture of that, so you can see that. So that was one of the things we did. But we did a variety of other projects Herb and I would do surveys at the nurseries for the tree nurseries for them, to let them know what kind of pests they had going on there. But it was essentially my role was technology transfer and showing them what could be done.
Yeah, for sure. And Herb and I, and I think it was 2012, we were at ATIS giving the provincial forest health staff lectures. He covered the insects, and I covered the diseases, and so Herb was doing that for quite a while. Ken, one of the neat things that we've got at Northern Forestry Center are some fairly important collections. I mean, there's the insect collections, but we also have the mycological herbarium there. Mm-hmm. And that collection has attracted a few people. I think probably, within the CFS, we're starting to pay more attention to these collections and really recognize how important they are. But, while you were working, were there any pathologists that came and utilized those collections?
Oh, yeah. As I said, Yasu was extremely well known throughout the world. So we had visiting scientists from all over, Britain, Germany, Japan, especially, China to some extent, India. Yeah. And a lot of them wanted to see that collection because nobody else had that. And they're really a gem the CFS has. And they were preserved. And just to carry on with that, there's these culture collections, which fungi can be cultured on an artificial media, and you can keep them around for a long time, as long as it's maintained. And those cultures were very important to many studies around the world. And in fact, we had several, we'll show you a picture of Japanese colleagues of Yasu who came and worked in our lab and did work on mycorrhizal fungi. But I do have an interesting story. This is kind of an offbeat thing, and I'm sure Jasper, I'm retired now, so I don't have to worry about it. Yasu is no, he's no longer here. But anyhow, one time we got a request. Yasu said, Kent, and this is when I was working for Yasu as a student. He said, we got to go up to Jasper and we're going to go look at some aspen trees. Okay, so we drive up to Jasper and Yasu pulls out a knife and starts carving away on a branch or on a bark and aspen. And I'm a little, you know, you're not supposed to do that in a national park. He says, oh, no, it's okay. We're gonna bring these Japanese scientists back and they're gonna sample these wounds for, okay, that sounds kind of strange. So anyhow, these two guys came back and came to Canada. And what they were was they worked for a giant bakery company in Japan, and they were trying to isolate new yeast that they could use on making bread. And so I don't know, many of them might have the yeast varieties may have come from these Jasper National Park trees. But you certainly couldn't do that now, but you could back, I guess, in the late 70s.
Yeah. So, I mean, you talked about getting out in the field, and you know, my background, I am originally from Victoria. I spent from 2002 until 2010 working in Rotorua in New Zealand, and then came to work at Northern. So, you know, the prairie provinces were new to me, and, you know, the eastern slopes of the Rockies were fairly new. So I really appreciated the time that, you know, Colin Muirholm spent with me out in the forest and just showing me things. And I think that was probably, Ken, when you were the director, you said, Colin, take Todd out and show him some things. And, you know, Colin, he just knows so much. And Colin's, I guess, one of a cohort of people who are hired and are still working for us. Do you want to talk about how those guys were brought on?
Sure. Well, just to sort of back it up a step,
Yeah.
FIDS Rangers and then a lot of the technicians, certainly Paul Murayama worked with Yasu Aratsuka and Howard Gates, who worked with Herb, and Roger and Brad and those, all of them were essential to what we were doing. And you know, Murray's on here, and there was sorry, I've just forgotten, blanked on a name, but anyhow, they were essential, and they have a tremendous knowledge of field biology and that, and yeah, they were very crucial to our work. So yeah, when Jan and I got all this money from the FERDAs, and it was like, and also with the when we did the baseline mountain study, and that was in the 90s, we got money from Husky Oil. And at that time, I think we got $500,000 over 3 years. And that was the largest single amount of money that CFS had ever received from private industry up until that point. And so and how that came to be, and I'll just back up a second, was that Martha Kostash, who was a prominent environmentalist in Southern Alberta, was worried that the sulfur dust blowing off Husky's their sour gas plants waste piles was polluting the forest. So she actually had told Husky Oil and Gulf Oil at the time that she wanted it monitored and that she'd only trust the Canadian Forest Service to do it. Now, Martha wasn't exactly friendly to us, but she respected our work. So anyhow, that's how that came to be. And Husky and Gulf joined, we had a partnership with them. And their only condition with us is you can have this money and we'll support you with a variety of different things. But the only condition was we want to see your report first, but we don't want to edit it. You can say whatever you want, but we want to see it first. So that was the condition. And they lived up to it. But those technicians were crucial to that work. And then, as I said, we had this FERDA money. And around that time, students were having, in university and at NAIT, were having a very difficult time finding work coming out of school. So the government recognized that, and they put together programs that we could hire them, and they would provide the money. This, I don't know which other department it was. So we were able to pick up a tremendous cohort of people. There was Colin, there was now Roger wasn't involved in that, but there was Brad, I think, might have been involved in it, several others. And they stayed on with us, which was a great thing to have happen. And Jan was a great field biologist, so he was a good mentor for a lot of students that came along after that. And they came in. And then Greg, you were, I think, was with, he was at the U of A, and Dave Langer, who was also at the U of A, came in at around shortly after. I think Dave came on at the same time as I did, and Greg came on just a little bit later, and Greg became the insect taxonomist, and Yasu, of course, was doing the mycological or the fungi identification.
Yeah. Well, I know that one of the things that makes it a treat to work there is just the people you work with, and I've certainly enjoyed my colleagues there. So I think, why don't we take a very quick little 30-second break while I put some pictures up, and then we can go through those. I think we've got about half an hour left, and I'm sure Ken will have some comments. I've got some comments, and it'll give you people in the audience something to look at other than us. So hopefully you can see that. Ken, can you just confirm that you can see the...
Yeah, it looks perfect, Don.
Okay, good. All right, so I'll just cycle through them here. And also, if anybody in the audience wants to make a comment or have any questions, you can feel free. So, okay. So Ken, you already mentioned the early years and the FIDs. So who is this fellow here in the photo?
Well, that's Jim Eamon. He was quite the character. He became, Herb knows well, he became the chief ranger of the FIDS, Forest Insect Disease Survey, in the 80s. And he was a very knowledgeable man, knew a tremendous amount about horticultural type of problems. This tree here, you can see he's pointing at, well, some groundskeeper on a golf course thought it would be a good idea to put soil sterilant around the tree, kill the grass so he didn't have to mow the grass. He managed to kill the tree. So anyhow, and then on the right, you can see these are these forest insect disease sampling forms. And there are tens of thousands of these things from across Canada. And that's how we know where stuff was and what, these rangers. Mike Grandmaison was a ranger here in our region for many years, and he would have recognized these forms. They went out and they would find problems, and they'd have to record where they were located, how much of the tree was damaged, if there was a lot of other things going on. And so these all got sent back. And as I understand it now, they've all been, I think, put into a database so they can be accessed to what was where, when, and what damage it was causing.
Yeah, 100%. So all these sheets have been scanned, and we had the data entered by some students, and Ian DeMerchant at the Atlantic Forestry Center looks after the FIDS info base, is what we call it now. So yeah, there's a lot of information on those forms. Okay, here's a fellow.
Here's the Herb and I were doing these field tours, and I don't know whether I'm off in the background there or not, but Herb was examining. It looks like it was elk damage or bear damage, and maybe we're sampling for yeast for Japanese bakeries, Herb. I don't know.
He is holding a hatchet, so maybe you'd like to explain yourself, Herb.
I look pretty troubled there.
Yeah,
we could have been quizzing him. Herb was an expert on root collar weevil, so we would always make sure we showed them root collar weevil on armillaria, didn't we, Herb? Aspen wouldn't have root collar weevils, so you're probably pretty perturbed about that.
Yeah. Okay. Here we have.
This the fellow on the right in the plaid shirt is Dr. Jan Volny, and to the left is Andrew Johannes, and Andrew was the technician that worked with Jan for many years. Great technician, wonderful guy. Worked extremely hard, and I can't say enough about the two of them.
Yeah,
Baseline Mountain is right behind where Huskies has their sour gas plant down around Rocky Mountain House. Speaking
of Andrew, I believe he retired in 2012, and he actually came out to us to Sandylands, and we sort of toasted his last field trip on that occasion. But there we go. So this is Dr. Doug Maynard, and he was a soil scientist, another terrific guy. He very knowledgeable guy, and we
Jan and I and Doug had many a memorable field trip, and that was a great project. This is on top of Baseline Mountain, and that is an interesting story. That fire tower there was that many of you, well, may not, they don't know if they even operate them anymore, but they had these people who do tower people who go up there, and a lot of them were either writers or artists or whatever, and they would go up and spend the summers, springs and summer working in these sites, working at the site, and then they go up and look at in the tower and look for smoke or whatever and report back. And sometimes they were pretty odd people. The person that was in that tower that year was pretty odd. We never saw them. They just sort of scampered off. And the other weird thing happened on this mountain too, is we were going up there one day, and we were up down there in a truck, and one of the students says, "What's that Samoyed dog doing up here?" It wasn't a Samoyed dog. It was a Rocky Mountain goat. And why was that where it was? Because Baseline is in the front range of the mountains. I don't know, but that's what that was. So.
Here we have Yasu. So.
Yeah, that's Yasu. That's his baby there. That's Western Gall rust, and that is what he's probably most famous for. And most rust fungi, many of you won't know, but most rust fungi have alternate hosts. So one part of their life cycle, they're on one plant, and then another part of their life cycle, they're on another plant. But Yasu was the one that showed that this particular rust only goes to one plant, and that's pine. Yep. And he worked out its life cycle, and that he was extremely well known for that, and many other things too. Yasu worked on so many things. He worked on decay fungi and with root disease and all sorts of other things. He was a very, very extraordinary scientist and extraordinary taxonomist.
And also a very polite gentleman. When I worked,
extraordinary.
When I came in 2010, he was still working as an emeritus scientist there. He took me out for lunch one day, and we had a nice chat. And
he was a very kind man. That's for sure.
Yeah. So,
and that's Paul Murayama. Now, he was a technician that worked with Yasu, and I have a sort of special place in my heart for Paul, because when I was a student, he and I would go out together, and he was very good to me. He would help me a lot, and he was a extremely positive attitude towards everything. He grew up on the West Coast, and during the Second World War, he was interned in a prisoner of war, or interned Japanese-Canadian internees camp in the middle of British Columbia, and spent most all the war there. And then they got moved to southern Alberta, and when they were finally allowed to move back to Vancouver, everything was gone, their home, all their furniture and that. But even with all that, Paul maintained a very positive attitude, very upbeat person. And as I said, he was very kind to me and to people he worked with. And I really miss him. Paul, I don't know if many people know, Paul passed away in 2017. And this is an enclosure slip that Paul did.
Yep, a silver leaf on somebody's cherry tree.
Yeah. And so this is Eiji Nagasawa. He's one of these visiting scientists that came from Japan, and he worked on ectomycorrhizal fungi. It's a type of fungus that associates with plants and trees, and it actually has a symbiotic relationship with the tree or the plant. So it provides the tree and the plant with nutrients, and in turn the plant provides the fungus with food, and is a place to live and to reproduce from. But these are armillaria mushrooms, and Eiji was pretty impressed with the size of them. So that picture was taken.
They are impressively large, those ones. Okay, Dutch elm disease in Manitoba.
So Mike would be familiar with that. That was a huge, many people, I'm sure the younger people have no idea about this, but this disease managed to wipe out most of the elms in Eastern Canada, or indeed most of North America and Europe. There are American elms still around, few and far between. It's a disease, but it's a fungus that causes the disease, but it's transmitted by a beetle. And it was a particular problem in Manitoba. Manitoba really valued its elm trees because of the shade that they provide. And, when people didn't have air conditioning, that shade was extremely important. And there's been numerous studies that have shown, particularly in the United States, that the economic loss that this caused in terms of by removing those trees and the shade that they caused, increase the amount of air conditioning that you had to use. And also elm was an important hardwood for the furniture industry. And so it was lost as well. So Edmonton is one of the few places that has a population of American elm, and it's not native to here, but one of the reasons why is we're isolated from the movement of the beetle. And you'll see traps up around Edmonton looking for this beetle to make sure that we don't lose these trees, because they're very good shade tree and they're very resistant to salt damage. So that's why we have a large population on streets and things like that.
Yep. So here's a photo here of some colleagues back in the day, because you can see the health and safety conditions are somewhat different than they would be now. But what are they doing, Ken?
Well, they were milling. Those were Dutch elm disease killed elm trees, and they wanted to salvage the wood because of its value. So here they have a portable mill, and you can see the one guy, he's standing about 4 feet away from a moving saw blade. And the guy's on top, he's got a chainsaw going. And the guy's about 3 feet behind him. Chainsaw, I'm not sure if it's running, but that could go badly there.
Yeah.
And none of them have any PPE on either. So they're taking their chances.
Yep, times have changed. So, Arcithobium americanum.
Yeah. So this was one of the diseases that the FIDS group discovered that was of great importance, along with armillaria and the rust in Western Canada. This is a parasitic plant that grows on pine trees, and you can find some, it's not the same species, but you can find it on spruce trees. And it's a particular problem in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, but to some degree in northern Alberta. And it's also a major problem on jack pine. Now, if you go over to Prince Albert, you'll see it in the jack pine stands there. And many of the people, because it's been there for so long and those trees were never harvested, many people thought that that's what, lay people or people who are not forestry people think that's what jack pine's supposed to look like. That's not what it's supposed to look like. And these big brooms you see, they're called witches' brooms. They can be a particular problem if the forest is quite dense and those brooms die and their fire gets going, those things, they can be quite a problem there. But if they do kill the tree, and it will eventually, you'll get a thinning of the forest, and it essentially it's just more like a wasteland. And there's a tremendous amount of this up by Fort McMurray. So when the Fort McMurray fire was going and other fires were going, once they got it away from the town and any settlements, they would have just let it go, because their idea would be, let's clean the forest out and start anew.
Yeah, so John Muir and James Brandt would have worked together, correct?
Yeah. So I failed to mention John Muir. He later became the forest pathologist for the province of British Columbia, and James, I'm sure many of you know, works for CFS down in Ottawa now.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So here we have Colin Muirholm and Andy out in the high level. So This is one of your integrated projects.
Yeah, well, we were pulling down spruce trees to see if we could see what damage spruce budworm and armillaria did to them. So that was one of these guys. It's a good thing we had them there, because I would have certainly been damaged myself. Can't speak for Jan, but these guys knew what they're doing. So
yeah. And then this is Brad Tom. Brad still works for us, and he's out there using high pressure water to clean the roots.
Yeah, so what we were doing was when we cut down these trees and we were seeing what the losses were, we would pull down the trees and pull up the roots, and then we'd measure the root volume, and then we correlate if there was growth loss with and damage from the spruce budworm with the root volume of the tree and the growth of the tree.
How about these two? What are they up to?
Well, I think that was one of our sampling exercises for decay and or probably for root disease. So that's Daryl Williams, and we had a tremendous number of very talented summer students. Karen was one of them. We were able to hire quite a few students. We had a really good program at NATE in the forest biology program, forestry program, and there's a biology program in the forestry tech program. So Roger came from the forestry tech program. Karen, I think, was in the biology program, as Colin was too, and they did a tremendous job of training field technicians. And Daryl was an entomologist from the U of A and a very talented taxonomist. And that's Karen again. She Paul must have been there with her.
Yes, the tree was killed by armillaria. So this is Colin in Torch River. It's another one of the places where you guys.
We were able to demonstrate there that there was the jack pine budworm was killing the trees that had armillaria in it, and then so we were able to demonstrate that and show that there's a relationship there and give that information to the province. And then later on, our own Ron Hall worked with Jan on how to detect these trees from remote sensing.
Here's another picture from Torch River. What strikes me here is the size of the field crew that you were able to.
Yeah, you probably never see that again. Whether we were that batch of money we had, we were able to hire an army of students. The interesting thing was when we went over there, we had a field office in Saskatchewan, and that the research development agreement operated, and so they bought all the equipment. Jim Farrell, who later on became the assistant deputy minister, ran that office. And so when Jan and I went over there, we weren't to bring any equipment over. We were to go to the office, pick up the equipment that was there, and then use it. And then we were to take it back to the office. So everything was to stay in Saskatchewan. And this was it was a fun project. The fellow who was the pest specialist there, what was his name? I forget right offhand, but anyhow, he was.
Rory?
Pardon me?
Rory
No,
McIntosh?
Rory's Mendan Pandilla. He was quite a character, and he showed up there, and Jan and I had a terrible time trying to prevent him from smoking in the woods because he was wondering, and you could see this place would probably go up if it didn't, and we would get blamed for it. So anyhow, and he would be filming us, and so I don't know whatever happened to that film production, but anyhow.
Okay. And maybe this is the same trip where around
that was a slightly different one. That was one of studies over by Meadow Lake and Torch River. And here again, we had these were university students mainly. And a lot of them, like university students have particularly in forestry and in environmental science, you don't really get the field experience that you need to learn how to set up plots. You do maybe in forestry, but the biology guys don't get that. And so a lot of them really wanted to get on with CFS so they could get that field experience because they wanted to become field biologists. Mm-hmm. And so Jan was a tremendous field biologist, a tremendous aptitude in sampling and what to do with that information. So he attracted some really top-notch students, and many of them stayed. John Ellison stayed with us.
Yeah. Speaking of Jan.
Yeah, there's the man. Yeah, we pulled up that route, and Jan was a real character, and I'm really grateful I had the chance to work with him, and he became a very close friend of mine. And he was never a dull moment with Jan. I'll tell you, you never knew what he was going to do or what he was going to say, but it was always fun.
Yeah, so that's quite an impressive taproot.
Yeah.
Obviously, the laterals have been trimmed off, and
so the river is just behind us, and we're right on some sand dunes there. And you wonder how these jack pine trees can survive on these sand dunes, but they just sink these roots down, and they obviously tap into that groundwater. So yeah, that's what we were able to figure out.
So here's one of your biocontrol projects, Ken.
Yeah. So one of the things that happened in the Forest Research Development Agreement was this grass is called Calamagrostis canadensis. It's a native grass to Canada, but it causes a lot of problems for reforestation because after you cut down white spruce on these sites, they're very moist sites, and this grass just takes off. And the spruce will grow. They can plant the spruce there. The spruce will grow, but what happens in the wintertime, this grass is so tall, then in the wintertime, the snow bends it over and presses down on the spruce tree, and then they tend to die out. So they were using glyphosate to control it, and but we were looking for a biological control that would work, and we were working with a thing called snow mold, and it's a native to the Western Canada. And the thing is it doesn't necessarily have to kill the grass. It just has to stump the grass until the spruce trees could get up and above it. And Richard Krieger, who works at CFS, well, and I guess he works in the Fiber Center. He was the forester up at Whitecourt at that time for Blue Ridge, not Blue Ridge. No, I'm just lost the name off my tip of my tongue here right now. But he was the forester that I worked with there, and we did these trials up there, and we showed it worked. And unfortunately, when we tried to get Dow Elanco or some of the other companies interested, it worked too well, and they weren't they weren't interested in commercializing it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, so we had a lot of students. We had some really great relationships, Jan in particular, but I did as well with the U of A with Peter Blennis, who was the professor of pathology over at the U of A, and Martin here was a student of Peter's, and he worked with us and came out to the field. And I think Martin later on became a pastor in a church. I'm not sure where he is now.
Okay. So yeah, no, it is nice to work with the university. That's one of the great things about having the university just down the road. So.
This is Eric Allen. Eric was a PhD student with Yasu, as I was, and Eric worked on Western Gaw Rust, and he later he got a job. He worked at Pacific Forestry Center, and he headed up this International Forestry Quarantine Research Group at PFC, and is very well known for his work internationally on quarantine.
Yeah, no, the work that they've done about the movement of solid wood packaging material in international trade is phenomenal. So, yeah.
And Pat Crane, sadly, Pat is no longer with us. She was also Yasu's last student, and Pat had started off with Yasu in Calgary as a summer student, and then later she was a very talented editor, and she worked for the National Research Council in the Canadian journals doing editing there. Later, her husband had worked for the RCMP, so he was later stationed back in Edmonton, and she started working with us again and decided to do a PhD with Yasu. So she worked on a little bit on aspens for her stem galls of aspen for her master's degree, and then she did a sort of a definitive study in the chrysomyxa rusts, which are rusts of spruce trees. And as well, she wrote as a co-author on this field guide to forest insect and diseases of prairie provinces.
Yeah, and I was lucky enough to know Pat when I was working in New Zealand. We brought her down as a postdoc to work on this disease of Pinus radiata called flute canker, which is caused by a nectria. So that's what she's standing beside. That's probably a 5 or 6 year old radiata pine. So some students.
Yeah.
No, I think it's fantastic. I mean, the opportunities that have been provided to students by the CFS are great. I was a student at the Pacific Forestry Center, and I certainly, learned a lot there, really valued my time there, and it's great. We still bring students on. So
I don't know what became of Scott Graham, the fellow on the left. Susan Russell is the lady in the middle. Susan actually, well, not actually, she does head up the research group at the Department of Defense in Suffield.
Oh, neat.
And, yeah, she has several degrees in microbiology. And Kim Schreiner, last I heard she had been working for the university, but I'm not sure where she is now.
Okay. So here's the pathology lab, which is right across the hall from my office, and it still looks kind of like that. So
yeah, we were very fortunate that we were. I can't complain. I was very well looked after in terms of the equipment that we were able to purchase and the help we were able to get. I was very fortunate in that.
Yeah, for sure. So this is the stumping trial in Manitoba.
Yeah, so this again was a FERDA project, and the province was so interested in this that they provided all the labor for planting this. These are all local people from, I don't know, probably around Steinbeck in that area, and so it looked like that. This is all sand, and we pulled all these roots out in one area and we left them in other areas. So as I said, it was a replicated trial, and you can see the backhoe there pulling out the stumps.
Yeah. So here we have you in 2000. So
yeah, now these are the trees. That's red pine, and I'm probably in one of the stands. I know whether that's I think that's one of the ones that we had stumped. So there was no disease in that, or practically no disease in that.
probably, so that would have been 8 years after the trial was initiated.
Yeah, so those trees are growing fairly well.
Is that one of the projects that Dave Itt worked on?
Yes.
Yeah, Dave
Yeah.
was involved in that. Yeah, Dave. So everybody knows Dave was he was a pathology officer or disease insect disease officer in the Manitoba office. So he and I worked on this together. Dave coordinated all the logistics to that, and we had these signs up, and then I don't know when's that sign. It was about 25 years afterwards. It probably has a bunch of shotgun blasts now.
Yeah. I have multiple photos of these signs, and one of them is absolutely destroyed, but those two are actually the same sign, so you can see how the trees have come up around it.
Yeah.
So, and there's some trees in 2012. So the last time we were there, we actually labeled them very well, and I'm hoping we can get back again there in the future. I mean, one of the neat things about the CFS is these long-term field trials. And Ken, you and David started something that, time is what we have in our back pocket. We can wait for it to happen. So we'll get out there and have a look, hopefully, in the future.
Yeah, and I guess I would say to the new managers and the new CF, people that are in there, these things are extremely important to keep under watch, because you'll never know when that information is going to become handy. And there's many, like the fire is one example, when we did all this work on fire, but also with insects and diseases. And we get these things that are, for example, with climate change now, we have these catalog of insect and disease problems that are there. And with climate change, they might become exacerbated with the differences in temperatures. And you're going to need to know what's where and how it's causing problems. And these are the kind of guys who can help you out with that, the field rangers.
Yep.
Field
So
technicians.
Brad, Colin, and Andrew there. And then here we have Colin, Brad, and Jim Weber. And everybody who's worked in the field, I'm sure, has had breakfast at Smitty's somewhere along the line. So it's one thing in common. And, this is a really important part of building a team, is actually eating together and doing these sort of things. We spend a lot of time with one another, and it is excellent to work with friends. And that's how you build these relationships. So. And here's Colin. This is some work, Ken, that we started doing up around Caroline, where the industry was having some problems with R. malaria. So we put some trap logs out, and trap logs are put in the soil to attract soil fungi and R. malaria. So it carries on. And this is the Zama spruce budworm. I put this in here. It's not necessarily a pathology project, but again, a large field trial that Jan started. So.
Yeah, and Jan developed a lot of very good information from that on losses from spruce budworm. And what he was doing is they did different treatments in terms of removing trees to see what effect it would have on the spruce budworm. And he got a lot of great information. Unfortunately, the site was lost to a fire, and I think in the 2000s sometime. But anyhow, industry supported this very well. They were the ones that they brought in these portable labs and then these living accommodations there, and then these guys, they did all the work.
Just another picture of the crew in the evening after collecting data.
Yeah. And
this is Brad. We were doing some work looking at heart rot of aspen caused by Phelinus tremulae. So I asked Brad to chop up this tree so that we could have a look inside, because from the exterior, it's difficult to tell just how much you're losing to the fungus inside. And you can see how much heart rot has taken over. So, and then this is some work that Colin and I have done at one of Ted's Cypha plots over at Miquelon. So I think it's called Menistic. And basically we set up this spore trap, and the idea was to trap spores of Phalinus tremulae in the aspen. So just hurrying things up here, looking at the time. Now, Herb, I'm glad you're on the call, because this paper was published in September of 2020, and you're a co-author on it. I'm sure you're aware of that. But
yeah, I got a copy of it.
yeah, so, you know, this basically was some work that Herb was doing some surveys for the provincial government out at the Alberta Tree Improvement and Seed Center. And he brought some samples into me and the lab, and I looked at it on a microscope. Just, geez, that looks a lot like Dothostroma, which is something I was familiar with in New Zealand. And we provided some advice to the province on how to deal with the Dothostroma problem. So they're spraying it there with some Yep.
So Todd, this is probably a good example of what can happen with climate change. This previously was not a problem.
100%.
It's now becoming a problem.
Yep. And there's a good segue there, because this is a picture taken around about the same time. The fellow in the center there is Alex Woods, who's a provincial forest pathologist in British Columbia. And he has written some papers on Dothostroma and climate change and how it's ramping up. So the reason I included this picture is just because it really shows how we are still working with the province. You know, we've got 3 federal people there, and then there's Dio, Tom, and Andy from Alberta, Alex from BC. So, you know, federal government working with 2 different provinces. And here we are. This is just out at near Rock Lake, and Michael was a postdoc working with Janice Cook at the U of A on Western Gall Rust. So we're still working on Western Gall Rust. And I've included a picture of Dave here, because Dave is an entomologist, but we'll let him have the honorary pathologist handle for this one because of the work that he's done with the fungal associates of mountain pine beetle. So he did some work with Colin. And publications. This is just basically some of the outputs that we've produced. And I did a really quick calculation of, you know, I just added up the number of papers in the CFS publications database that are first authored by, or sorry, not first authored, included Hiratsuka, Mallett, Thorman, and Ramsfield. 298. And, you know, that's probably a pretty rough number. There could be more, could be less, but that includes international peer-reviewed papers as well as information reports and that sort of thing. And these, Ken, did you want to say something about these field guides?
Yeah, well, that book on the right or on the left, you see Yasu came up with this idea in the 80s and produced this book, and it was mainly a sort of a handbook for the provincial government people to be able to identify diseases. And then there was a companion volume done by Bill Ives for the insects. And that book eventually became almost a textbook for students in the forestry schools in the prairie provinces and the technical colleges in the prairie provinces. And later they morphed it into this field guide for the insect and diseases of the prairie provinces. And that was a pocket-sized book, which was a really good idea.
Yeah, no, it's a very valuable resource. So, okay, well, this is the last slide, and it's a beautiful picture of Yasu. And the reason why it's there is because as part of the 50th celebration, we're going to name the room that the mycological herbarium is in after Yasu. We're going to call it the Yasu Hiratsuka Herbarium. So stay tuned for that. It's we'll have a whole webinar about that because it's a real honor. Like I said earlier, I was really lucky to get to know him, and the contributions that he has made to rust taxonomy and mycology, we want to recognize in the building. So, all right, that is the end of the slideshow. So I'm going to stop sharing. I don't know if there was any comments that came up or questions, but if anybody has any questions or comments that they'd like to make,
I
please.
guess, sure, I'd like to say just a few things. I'm Mike, and although most of this has been about the last 25 years or so, 20 years of what's happened in forest pathology, I was there just a bit previously to that, maybe the 20 years before that. So, but it was interesting. I mean, one comment that you made about, the people and the interactions between people, and it was like a one big family, and I still feel that. Obviously, I'm participating today because it's close to me, and folks like Herb and Ken, who I've worked with, a fair bit, was very important for me. And there's other people as well, like Yasu, but guys like Jack Petty, who we seem to have forgotten. He was my very first supervisor, and Ken mentioned about being in the field and learning so much from people like that. Well, for me, it was, he was my mentor. And then it was, people like Herb, who I'd go out with as well, and on, like I said, workshops and stuff. And then, of course, Jan Volney became that person in the later years. So anyway, it was great. It was great memory lane. And but there was another 20 years before that a lot of things happened too, and another 20 years before that, like guys like Vern Pattison, right, Herb, and who were there much before us. And I never thought I'd actually be away from the family that long, and yet here we are. But we're still around. Anyway, good to see you guys.
Anybody else like to say anything?
A comment on what you had said earlier, or what the slide you had shown earlier there with jack pine dwarf mistletoe. Remember in 1960 this was, I drove up into that area with Jim Caprid from Manitoba. We met the Saskatchewan forester from Prince Albert, and in this area, the mistletoe didn't just cover acres of area, it seemed to cover quarter sections of area. Anyways, from there, we drove through healthy jack pine for several miles, and we came on a railroad track. And Jim Caprid asked the Saskatchewan forester, is the track still being used? And his reply was, there's one train a week, but it could hit you.
I'd like to thank you, Ken and Todd, for a very good presentation. I learned a lot from your review, Ken. It was you brought back a lot of memories of early days, and I've learned quite a bit from the pathology side. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Herb.
Yeah, we do have some videos, but I don't think they'd be that great to show about our training videos that we used to have with the FIDS group. They're quite colorful. And
yeah, some of them are a little bit off.
Or would be today anyway.
Yeah.
I have one, maybe just tell that one story, Todd, about one time I was in my office and I got this phone call from a television station down in Calgary, and this guy was asking me, we've been doing this series of on this mysterious ring that's growing up the Ghost River Mountains there, and it looks like a donut. And he did send me a picture, and he says, we've been told it could be secret experiments, military experiments from the Second World War, and these guys from the province who were the firefighters, they saw this mysterious orange stuff on the bark, and they think it's UFO landings. And so I said, well, I think I know what it is. So anyhow, he got me down there, and they took me on this trip on this helicopter. And so they were kind of quizzing me as we go. And anyhow, we got over this site, and I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure I know what it is. And so I got down, and this guy, he was pretty nervous because this was an expensive flight. So I got down and I hacked away at the bottom of a tree. And fortunately for me, the first hack, there was armillaria. And I said, oh, there's your culprit, because it's like a fairy ring on your grass. It just keeps growing out and out, and then you get new trees coming into the center. Well, I didn't realize this. This was a big hit on down in Calgary because it was they were trying to do ratings for their TV shows. So they would every couple of weeks they were doing a thing on this mysterious rings in the forest, and finally this was their rating week. So they put up this thing. Oh, we've got the answer now. So apparently they got lots of views. But that was the weirdest thing I ever had to do for CFS.
Well, it's always nice to go out there and actually find what you're looking for.
Okay.
Well, I guess if there's no other comments or questions, I'll hand it back to you, Ron, and you can.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, both Ken and Todd, for putting this great show and walk down memory lane of forest pathology. And thank you all for those who got connected in today. Quite a few of you are those that haven't been able to participate in some of the earlier presentations, so it was great to see some new names and faces today. This NoFC 50th anniversary seminar event will continue. We're going to take a little hiatus over the summer just because of availability of people from field travel, holidays, and so forth. And we're going to pick it back up in September. We have 3 more coming in September, October, November, and we'll finish off hopefully in November. So this is being recorded, and we'll be able to provide linkages to this thing as they become available. But thank you again for your participation today, and thank you again, Todd and Ken, for this great review that you put on today.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everybody.